The microphone cut out before I finished my second sentence. I stood in the center of the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, 47 species watching me from curved tiers of seats that rose so high I could not see the ceiling. The air smelled like something between copper and rain. My name is Yael Orin, commander of Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Division, and I had traveled 11 weeks through jump space to stand in this room and tell them all that something ancient was coming to end everything they had ever built. They turned off my microphone at the 20-second mark. I kept talking anyway. Not because I thought they would suddenly listen. I kept talking because the words needed to be said, even into silence, even into the low ripple of alien laughter that moved through the upper tiers like a slow wave. I kept talking because 17 years of my life were in that data chip I was holding, and I was not going to swallow those years quietly just because the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy had decided, in less time than it takes to boil water, that a human was not worth hearing. Councillor Vreth of the Therni finally raised one of his 4 arms. The laughter stopped. He was tall, pale as old bone, with dark, reflective eyes that had never once blinked during my 20 seconds of speaking. He looked at me the way you might look at an insect that had landed on your breakfast. "Commander Orin," he said, and the translation chip behind my ear rendered his words in flat, careful English. "Your species has been registered with this council for exactly 14 years. In that time, you have submitted 9 formal petitions, none of which have met the standard of credible evidence required for full deliberation. This is your 10th. You claim that a fleet of automated destroyer-class vessels, ancient in origin and unknown in construction, is approaching the outer rim on a heading toward inhabited space. You have provided sensor readings from a single human monitoring station, one station, on one planet. You are asking 47 civilizations, some of which have been spacefaring for longer than your species has had written language, to take military action based on the output of equipment we have not certified, operated by analysts we have not vetted, submitted by a species that, with respect, has not yet demonstrated the scientific maturity required for this council to treat its conclusions as reliable." He folded his arm back against his robe. "We will now vote." I had rehearsed for this moment. I had prepared counters to every argument, charts for every objection, secondary source data pulled from Therni orbital arrays that had independently picked up signal anomalies matching my models. I had a full rebuttal prepared. I had 3 different versions of it, depending on how the objections came. None of that mattered now, because they were already voting. 43 of 47 species voted to dismiss the petition and expel it from the session record entirely. 3 abstained. 1, a small aquatic civilization called the Survey, voted in favor of further investigation. They sent me a quiet nod from their pressurized tank enclosure on the far tier. I nodded back. The chamber began to clear. Delegates drifted toward exit corridors. Staff gathered data pads. Someone nearby made a sound that the translation chip rendered as mild amusement. I walked to the podium. I set the data chip down on its surface, flat and precise, the way you set a key on a table when you are leaving a house for the last time. The chip contained the full sensor dataset, the mathematical models, the projected arrival windows, the fleet density estimates, and one additional file I had added the night before in my transit cabin. That file was a countdown. 11 months, 3 weeks, 4 days. It updated in real time. I leaned toward the still dead microphone, out of habit more than anything else. You have 11 months, I said. Then I turned and walked out of the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, and I did not look back once. The shuttle was cold. I had not noticed on the way in, but on the way out, the cold reached me. I sat in the co-pilot seat and watched the council station shrink through the forward window, a structure the size of a small moon, ringed with docking arms and signal arrays and the running lights of 1,000 ships that belonged to civilizations older and larger and better resourced than mine. My co-pilot, a young man named Owen Cole, who had been with me for 4 years and who never said unnecessary things, set a sealed cup of coffee in the holder beside my armrest. I picked it up. They laughed, he said, after a while. Not as a question. Some of them. I said, what do we do now? I looked at the station until it was gone from the window, replaced by the black and the stars, which looked the same out here as they did from Earth, and always made me feel strangely more grounded than I felt anywhere else. We go home, I said, and we get to work. Owen nodded once and set the ship onto its jump space coordinates. I drank my coffee. It was not good coffee. It had never been good coffee on any ship I had ever served on, and I had long ago decided this was one of those things you simply accept and move forward from. 11 months. I opened my personal log and began writing the first planning document. Not a report, not a petition, a plan. The stars disappeared as we entered jump space, and I kept writing. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a decision you cannot take back. Not an empty silence, a full one. It has texture, almost, like the moment after you step off a ledge and your body hasn't understood gravity yet. That silence followed me home. I filed my mission report with the division on landing. I marked the council petition as closed. I sent one short message to the director of Earth's Unified Defense Coordination, a man named Gordon Bale, who I had known for 12 years and trusted absolutely, and the message said only, they said no. Start the contingency. He replied in under a minute. Already started. That was the beginning of the 11 months. That one-line exchange. And from that moment, I barely slept. I want to be honest about something. The council was not wrong to be skeptical. 17 years is a long time to watch a signal that might be nothing. Our monitoring equipment, while good, was not the most advanced in the galaxy. Our species had been reaching into deep space seriously for only a few generations. In the long history of the galaxy, we were very new, but here is what the council did not understand about being new. Being new means you have not yet learned what to ignore. Being new means you look at everything with the same attention, because you have not yet built the habits that decide what is important before you even look. The Therniae had 17,000 years of space exploration. They knew what a sensor ghost looked like. They knew what background radiation anomalies meant. They had filed those patterns and moved on so many times that the movement was automatic. They no longer even saw the question. We saw it. We saw it because we were still learning to look. That was not arrogance. That was just where we were in the timeline of things. And it meant that when something genuinely new appeared in the dark, something that did not match any ghost or anomaly they had ever filed, we noticed it because nothing in our experience told us not to. The data chip I left on that podium in the Grand Chamber contained 11 months of my life. It also contained the truth. And I left it there, not because I thought they would read it in time, but because I wanted the record to exist. I wanted, when everything that came next had finished happening, for there to be a chip on a podium that said, "She told you." They had 11 months. We had 11 months, and a species that had spent its entire existence preparing for the worst. There was no question which of us was going to be more ready. The first thing Gordon Bale said to me when I walked into the emergency planning room at the Defence Coordination Building in Cape Town was this: "We have 16 functional deep space warships." I sat down across from him. The room was underground. It smelled like recycled air and old paper, which I had always found comforting in a room where hard decisions were being made. It meant the room had been used many times before, and the world had kept going. "That's not enough," I said. "No," he agreed. "So we're going to build more." Gordon was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, with a face that had spent decades not showing what he was thinking. He had run Earth's Defense Planning Office since before I had my commission. He was not a man who panicked. He was also not a man who pretended. When he said something was going to happen, he had already done the math. He slid a tablet across the table to me. I looked at the numbers. "This is the projected build rate," he said. "Starting immediately, running 24 hours a day across all operational shipyards. Lunar facilities go to full capacity in 3 weeks. The asteroid foundries will take 6 weeks to retool, but once they're running, they output twice what the lunar yards can manage." I scrolled through the projections. The numbers climbed in ways that I found almost hard to believe, and I was the one who had been building toward this contingency for 2 years. "Where does the material come from?" I asked. "We've already started diverting. 3 asteroid mining operations in the belt redirected as of yesterday. 2 more will redirect by end of the week. We're calling it an infrastructure expansion in the public communications." "Which is accurate." I looked at him. He looked back. "We're going to tell people," I said. "We have to." He nodded slowly. "Not everything, not yet, but soon. The production increase is going to be visible. We can't hide that kind of industrial output for long. We'll frame it as a defense preparedness initiative." Which is also accurate. That was Gordon's particular talent. He could tell a partial truth in a way that was technically perfect and ethically sound, and still left enough room for the public not to panic before panic would be useful. I had always admired that skill without being entirely sure I approved of it. "What's our priority list?" I asked. He tapped the tablet and a new screen appeared. Ship types, armament categories, defensive configurations. "We're not building a fleet to match theirs. We can't know their tonnage, their firepower, their numbers with certainty. So we're not trying to outmass them. We're building for speed, for maneuverability, for intelligence gathering at close range, and for concentrated firepower at specific target points." I understood immediately. He was describing a fleet built around what we knew about the destroyer vessels, not around what a conventional war looked like. The destroyers were massive. Their sensor arrays, based on 17 years of our monitoring data, had clear gaps at certain frequencies and angles. They were built for overwhelming force, not for the kind of multi-directional fast response engagement that required processing speed. "We hit the gaps," I said. "We hit the gaps," he confirmed. Across the next weeks, the shipyards changed. Not slowly, with the kind of speed that surprised even the people managing the transition. I travelled between facilities constantly in those first 2 months. Cape Town, to the lunar yards, to the Ceres foundry, and back. The lunar yards at night were extraordinary. White towers against the black, lights running in every bay, the sparks of welding visible from 2 kilometers away like a field of stars that moved. Workers moved in shifts, 6 hours on and 4 hours off, because human endurance has a biology that must be respected even in crisis. I met a lot of people in those months. The kind of people who do not appear in news reports or receive commendations, the welders who spent 8 months learning a new plating technique because our material scientists had determined it was the best resistance against the energy signatures the destroyers emitted. The engineers who redesigned 3 generations of engine configuration in 4 months because we needed acceleration profiles no existing ship had ever tested. The supply coordinators who moved resources across 300 million kilometers of space with the calm efficiency of someone sorting mail. Humans, when they decide something matters, become a different creature than they are on ordinary days. A man named Daniel Shaw, one of the chief engineers at the lunar yards, told me something in month 4 that I wrote down in my log and have not forgotten. We were standing in Bay 12 watching a new frigate frame being assembled, and I had asked him how his team was holding the pace. He said, "Humans don't need everything to be okay. We just need to know that we're doing something. Once we're doing something, we can do it forever." I thought about that for a long time. I thought about Council of Reth and his 47 civilizations and the comfortable assurance of a species that had been safe for so long that the word danger had become theoretical. Then I thought about Earth's history. Every time a problem had seemed too large, too permanent, too fixed to be moved, and I thought about the fact that not one of those problems still existed. Not a single one. They had all been moved, eventually, by people who kept doing something. Month 4 became month 5. Month 5 became month 6. The fleet grew. At month 7, I was called to a briefing with Gordon and a senior analyst named Petra Holt, who ran our deep space sensor network. Petra was quiet, in the way that people who spend a lot of time with data are quiet. She put information in front of you and waited. She trusted you to catch up. She put a star map on the screen. Then she put a second overlay on top of it. "They've adjusted course," she said. My stomach tightened. "Adjusted how?" "Minor. About 3 degrees along the lateral axis. It doesn't change the arrival window significantly, but it changes the entry corridor." She highlighted a region of space. "They will come in through here, not here." She moved the pointer. The original entry corridor had a natural sensor shadow from this pulsar cluster. We had been planning to stage our forward observation ships in that shadow. This new corridor removes that advantage. I looked at the map for a long time. "They know we're watching," I said. "The adjustment is consistent with that interpretation," Petra said, in the careful way that meant yes. The destroyers were not simply a fleet on a fixed path. They were, in some way, responsive. That changed the calculus significantly. I sent a second message to the Galactic Council that same day. It was 1 paragraph. It contained Petra's new sensor data, the course adjustment, and the updated entry corridor. I did not ask for anything. I did not request a meeting or a response or an apology. I simply sent the data and closed the message with, "This information may assist your own preparations, if you have begun any." I did not expect a response. I did not receive one. But I sent it, because the data mattered more than the silence between us. Month 8 brought the first visual contact. Not from our sensors, from the Turney. A 30 deep-range telescope array on their outer colony, 3 jump points from Earth detected what their analysts initially classified as a rogue stellar object cluster. Then a second analyst looked at the movement pattern. Then a third was called in. Within 48 hours, the Thurnii Senior Astronomical Council had issued an emergency reclassification, not a stellar cluster, a fleet. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session that same day. My communications console chimed at 030 inches the morning, Cape Town time. I was not asleep. I was reviewing updated engine test results from the new frigate class in Bay 7. The message was from the Council's administrative office. It was formal and used 5 different phrases that, in Thurnii diplomatic language, functioned as apology without technically being one. At the end, it requested my immediate presence at the Council station for an urgent joint session. I put down the engine test results. I picked up my coffee. I waited 6 hours before I replied. Not out of cruelty, not out of pride. I replied at 9, because our overnight shift was ending and I wanted to finish reviewing their work before I handed the floor to the morning team. The fleet mattered more than any point I might make by hurrying, and the fleet was almost ready. When I did reply, my message was short. I will attend. Please prepare a full-access briefing room and ensure my microphone is functioning. Owen Cole was already at the shuttle when I arrived at the bay. He had a thermos of coffee in one hand and the pre-flight checklist in the other. He looked at me. I looked at him. They finally called, he said. They did, I said. How long did you make them wait? 6 hours. He considered this. Then he handed me the thermos. That seems about right. We lifted off into a sky that was moving from dark blue toward a pale grey morning. And I thought, 11 months ago, I stood in that chamber alone. Whatever came next, I would not be alone in it. And neither, now, would they. The universe was not interested in whether the council had been ready. It only cared about what arrived next. What arrived was enormous. I want to be precise about this, because the word enormous is not strong enough, and the word terrifying is too dramatic. The destroyer fleet appeared on the long-range feeds at 6:42 station time, 3 weeks before my updated model had predicted, which told me something important. They were accelerating. Not toward a specific target yet, just accelerating. Like something waking up and stretching. I was in the joint command room on the council station when the feeds came live. Around me were senior military representatives from 19 of the 47 species, plus the full council arbitration board, plus 3 Thurnii fleet admirals, who had more military experience between them than all of humanity's armed forces combined. The room was very quiet for about 30 seconds. Then everyone started speaking at once. I did not speak. I watched the feed. The fleet was dense. Not a long formation, not a spread-out engagement line, but a deep cluster. Vessels packed in a way that suggested their designers had not built them for mutual engagement. They had been built to hit something from a single direction with everything they had at once. That told me something too. I tapped Owen's arm. He was beside me at the display console. Get me the entry corridor projection, I said, quietly enough that only he could hear. He pulled it up. The fleet's heading matched exactly what Petra had predicted from the course adjustment in month 7. They were coming through the open corridor, not the pulsar shadow. Smart. They had changed their approach based on something, whether it was a scan of our sensor positions or just systematic caution. One of the Thurnii admirals, a tall woman named Fleet Admiral Sene, stepped toward the display and pointed at the fleet cluster. Her translation chip rendered her words in flat, measured tones. At current speed and heading, they will reach the outer colony defensive perimeter in approximately 40 hours. 42, I said. She turned to look at me. 42 hours, I repeated. They'll decelerate slightly through this gravity gradient. I tapped the region on the display. Their mass profile suggests inertial dampeners that are efficient but not instantaneous. They have to bleed speed before engagement, or their own weapons fire will destabilize their formation. She studied me for a moment, then she looked at the display, then back at me. You've been modeling them for 17 years, I said. She nodded, slowly, and the nod had something in it that was not quite respect yet, but was close to the beginning of it. Then perhaps, she said, you should tell us what you know. I had been waiting a long time to be asked that question in that tone. Not the dismissive, permission-granting tone of Reth in the Grand Chamber. This was a different tone. This was the tone of someone who understood, suddenly, that the person in front of them had information they needed. I stepped to the front of the room. Nobody turned off my microphone. Thank you, I said, and then I began. The destroyer fleet's lead vessels engaged the Thurney outer colony defensive line at 8:17 station time, 42 hours and 9 minutes after first contact on the long-range feeds. My margin of error was 9 minutes over a 42-hour window. I noted this privately and moved on. The Thurney flagship, a command vessel called the Endless Patience, was in position at the leading edge of the defensive formation. Fleet Admiral Senni was aboard it. She had command of a combined Thurney and Sauvé force of approximately 200 vessels. They were well-trained, well-armed, coordinated, and experienced. They lasted 8 minutes against the destroyers before the Thurney I command was issuing full retreat orders. I watched this from the forward observation deck of my own ship, the ESS Durban, a modified heavy frigate that we had finished arming 6 days earlier. Around the Durban, in a loose formation that we had drilled for 4 months, were 41 other human vessels. Not the 200 we had wanted. Not the 400 the full build schedule would eventually produce. 42 ships. The Endless Patience took a direct strike at the 7-minute mark. The strike was from a weapon type we had no exact name for yet. A condensed pulse that travelled at roughly 80% of light speed and hit with a force that our instruments suggested was equivalent to a sustained fusion detonation focused to a 2-meter point of impact. The Thurney flagship did not explode. It simply stopped being intact. One moment it was there, the next it was a dispersing field of debris. I did not know if Senni had survived. There was no time to find out. All ships, I said into the fleet-wide channel, keeping my voice even and unhurried, because the voice on the command channel is what people's hands do next. Formation Delta. We go in on the left corridor, grid coordinates as transmitted, targeting priority is the second rank of destroyers, not the lead. Let their own forward vessels block their firing lines. Stay in the blind spots. Do not hold position. Keep moving. Owen confirmed the coordinates. The Durban accelerated. The destroyers were enormous up close in a way that the feeds had not fully conveyed. They were not ship-shaped in any way that felt familiar. They were long and asymmetric, dark material that absorbed nearly all light, studded with protrusions whose purpose I could not immediately determine. They moved with the slow certainty of something that had never encountered meaningful resistance. Their sensor arrays swept in patterns I had spent years analyzing, and those patterns had gaps, clean and consistent gaps, at 15 degrees above the equatorial plane on the port side facing. We flew into those gaps. The first 12 minutes were the kind of controlled chaos that either works or it does not, and you do not know which until it is over. The human fleet moved in pairs and trios, fast and low relative to the destroyer hulls, cutting across firing angles, placing themselves between the destroyer weapons and the retreating Therni vessels long enough for the Allied ships to reach the jump threshold. A ship called the ESS Kano was hit in the 3rd minute. It lost its primary drive, but kept maneuvering on secondaries. Its crew did not stop. They kept firing, kept moving, slower now but still in the fight, and I logged their position and sent 2 other ships to provide cover and kept moving myself. At the 11-minute mark, I saw the targeting solution I had been looking for. One of the lead destroyers had slightly miscalculated its own deceleration and was drifting just slightly into a position that exposed its rear drive assembly. The drive assembly was not armoured the same way as the hull. We had theorised this for years, based on energy output patterns. A concentrated strike from multiple angles at the drive assembly might not destroy the vessel, but would cripple its capacity to manoeuvre. All ships in range of target 9, I said. Converge on the rear drive assembly. Full output. On my mark. There were 7 ships in range. Owen had already calculated the firing solution. Mark, I said. 7 ships fired simultaneously. The rear drive assembly of the lead destroyer went dark. The vessel began to drift, slowly, off its heading. Not destroyed, crippled, but the gap it left in the formation opened a corridor for the remaining Therni vessels on the left flank to break through and reach jump distance. 41 Therni ships made it out through that corridor in the following 4 minutes. I stayed in the fight. There is a moment in any engagement where the variables collapse into a single problem that has to be solved immediately or not at all. For me, that moment came at minute 19, when 3 destroyers shifted formation in a way that was not in any of my models and began a slow convergence on the centre of our fleet's position. They were learning, or something aboard them was processing and adjusting. The centre of our formation was where our 2 heaviest ships were, the ESS Fremantle and the ESS Durban itself. If those 3 destroyers completed the convergence, the firing angles would catch us regardless of which direction we moved. There was only one corridor out. It ran directly between the forward array of the leftmost destroyer and a secondary weapons cluster on the central one, a corridor about 400 meters wide. Enough for one ship to pass through at high speed if that ship was moving fast enough that the tracking systems could not adjust in time. Owen, I said. I see it, he said. Fremantle takes the fleet out through the lower corridor. We take this one. He was quiet for 1 second. Exactly 1. Understood. I got on the fleet channel. Commander Orin to fleet. Fremantle has command. Exit through lower corridor, heading as follows. I transmitted the coordinates. Durban is going through the centre. Move now. The Fremantle's captain, a woman named Clara Webb, acknowledged without hesitation and began leading the fleet out. She was good. She would get them clear. The Durban went forward at maximum thrust. The corridor at 400 meters looks different when you are inside it than it does on a tactical display. On the display, it is a gap. In reality, it is 2 walls of dark metal moving on either side of you, close enough that I could see the surface texture of the destroyer hull, close enough that the Durban's proximity alarms were continuous and useless. The weapons array on the left destroyer began to track. It was slow to respond. Not slow enough. The strike hit the Durban's port side at the midpoint of the corridor. It was not a full strike, a glancing connection, a fraction of what the weapon could deliver, because we were moving fast and the tracking had not fully caught us. But a fraction of that weapon was still significant. The port side lost atmospheric containment in 2 sections, emergency barriers sealed in under 2 seconds. The secondary power grid went down and the backup came online in 4. Owen was already executing a roll to reduce our exposed surface as we cleared the corridor, and then we were through, and the 3 destroyers were behind us, and the fleet was ahead of us, and Clara Webb's voice was on the channel saying, "Every ship accounted for." I sat back in my seat. The port side was venting trace atmosphere through a microfracture in the emergency seal. My left arm, which I had braced against the console during the strike, was sending me information I chose not to think about until later. Owen was running a damage assessment. The fleet was moving toward jump distance. "We're out," Owen said. "Yes," I said. "That was close." "Yes," I said again. He handed me the thermos. There was still some coffee in it, warm enough to matter. I drank it. 41 Therni ships had made it out through the corridor we opened. Our full fleet had cleared. Not without damage, not without loss. The ESS Cano would not make another jump. Its crew was evacuated to the Fremantle. 3 other ships had significant damage, but they were alive and they were clear. It was not a victory. It was something more complicated than a victory. It was survival, which is sometimes the only available form of winning. The Durban made jump at 9:54 station time. As the stars collapsed around us into the grey non-space of jump transit, I opened my log and began writing the debrief notes that would form the basis of the next planning session. My left arm was broken in 2 places. I logged that too. The medical bay on the council station was Therni in design, which meant it was very efficient and very cold, and the beds were built for people significantly taller than I am. A Therni medical technician set my arm with a precision that I would have appreciated more if I had been able to think about anything other than the debrief that was already scheduled for 2 hours later. Councillor Vreth came while my arm was still in the setting cradle. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he stepped in. He was alone, which surprised me. Vreth was never alone. He had staff, aides, diplomatic observers, a small ecosystem of assistants. Alone meant this was not official. It meant he had come himself, without process, which, for a Therni of his rank, was extraordinary. He stood near the bed. He looked at my arm. He looked at the wall. He looked at the floor. "The endless patience," he said, finally. The translation chip gave me flat words, but there was something underneath them that even the chip could not strip away. "Fleet Admiral Sen, she was aboard." "I know," I said. "She did not evacuate in time." I said nothing. There was nothing to say that would be true and also kind, so I chose true. "We were warned," I said. He turned to look at me directly, for the first time since he had entered the room. His dark eyes were unreadable. I did not know Therni well enough to know if they cried. I did not know if they felt things the way I understood the word feel. But standing there, in that cold medical bay, I understood that something was happening in Vreth that was important, regardless of what word I used for it. "You were warned," he said. And this time the words were aimed at himself, not at me. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a long time. The medical technician moved around us both as though we were furniture, completing the arm-setting process with careful efficiency. The council, Vreth said, finally, is convening a full military response session in 3 hours. They are requesting your participation, your input, not as a petitioner. He paused. As a strategist. I looked at him. Not as a petitioner, I repeated. No, I let that sit for a moment. Not to make him uncomfortable, to let myself feel the weight of it properly. 17 years, 1 dismissed petition, 42 ships, a broken arm, 41 rescued vessels, a fleet of destroyers that had adjusted course because something aboard them was thinking, I'll be there, I said. I need 45 minutes first. He nodded and moved toward the door. Vreth, I said. He stopped. I need a full access briefing room. Every tactical data set the Council has ever collected about the Outer Rim. Every species' historical records of similar signals. Everything. He turned slightly. That is classified material across 12 separate Council jurisdictions. I know, I said. I need it anyway. Another long pause. It will be ready, he said. Then he left. And I lay back and looked at the ceiling, which was made of some smooth, pale material that reflected light evenly, and I thought about Daniel Shaw standing in Bay 12 telling me that humans just need to know they are doing something. We were still doing something. Good. We had a long way yet to go. There is a particular kind of grief that lives in the space between what should have happened and what did. I had known for 11 months that people would be lost in this fight. I had written that acknowledgement into my planning documents with the careful language of strategic probability, expected casualties, projected losses, numbers in a model. The ESS Carno's crew were not numbers. The 41 Thurnii ships that made it out carried people whose names I would never know, who had watched their flagship disappear in the span of a breath, who had survived because 42 human ships flew into the gaps of something enormous and held the line long enough for them to run. I thought about this in the 45 minutes I had requested. Not to process it completely. You do not process these things completely in 45 minutes. You do not process them completely in a lifetime. But you acknowledge them, you name what has happened, and then you stand up. I stood up. The briefing room Vreth provided was large, cold, and filled with more data than I had ever seen assembled in one place. 47 species worth of outer rim observation records, historical anomaly reports, old signal logs that had been classified at various levels for various reasons. A young human analyst named Ned Hartley, who Gordon had sent ahead as part of my support team, had been working through it since I asked. He was on his 4th cup of something warm and his 3rd notepad of handwritten cross-references. What do we have? I asked, sitting down across from him. He slid a notepad toward me. They've seen them before, he said, and his voice had the quiet weight of someone who had just found something they did not want to have found. Not recently, and not here, but there are 6 separate observation records from 6 different species, oldest going back about 4,000 years, describing object clusters with movement signatures that match our destroyer fleet within a margin that is not coincidental. I looked at the notepad. He had marked the records with coloured tabs, cross-referenced the signal frequencies, laid it out with the kind of systematic clarity that makes you grateful for certain kinds of careful minds. 4,000 years, I said. At minimum, Ned said. And here's the part that matters. In 5 of the 6 recorded instances, the clusters appeared and then disappeared. retreated. They made a pass at the edge of inhabited space and then went back to wherever they came from. I looked at him. And the sixth? He was quiet. No, the sixth was the Orali, he said. I knew the name from council historical records. The Orali had been a spacefaring species, old and well established, extinct for approximately 3,000 years. The official council record listed their extinction as cause unknown. Show me the Orali record, I said. He pulled it up on the data screen beside us. The signal log was 4,000 years old, rendered in a script that the translation matrix converted imperfectly, but the shape of it was clear enough. A fleet of objects, outer rim, approach, trajectory, no response to communications, no response to defensive posture. The Orali record ended there. Not with a retreat, not with a resolution, just ended. The destroyers had not come through this region randomly. They had a history here, and the history said that civilizations who were not ready were not here anymore to talk about it. We need to go to the source, I said. Ned looked at me carefully. The source meaning what? Exactly. Their origin point. Whatever sends these fleets out. Whatever is behind this. We have been thinking about this as an engagement problem. Stop the fleet. Survive the attack. But if this has been happening for 4,000 years, stopping one fleet does not stop the pattern. There is something that keeps sending them. He was quiet for a moment. That's deep space navigation into completely unmapped territory based on trajectory projections from 17 years of our own data and fragments of 4,000-year-old records. Yes, I said. That's not a military operation. That's an expedition into the unknown. Yes, I said again. He looked at the data screen. He looked at his notepad. He looked at me. Who goes? He said. We'll figure that out, I said. First, I have to convince 47 species that the problem is bigger than anyone thought. I walked into the full council session at exactly 3 hours after Vreth had visited the medical bay. My arm was in a support brace. I had not slept. I had 2 tablets worth of Ned's analysis and my own 17 years of sensor data and the cold, clear certainty of a person who has been right about something large and unpleasant and is now in the room where that rightness cannot be ignored. 47 species looked at me. No one turned off my microphone. I set my tablets on the podium. I looked out at the curved tiers, the same tiers where, 11 months ago, I had been reduced to speaking into silence. What you saw at the outer colony perimeter, I said, is not the first time this has happened. And if we handle it the way you are all currently planning to handle it, it will not be the last. The room was very quiet. 4,000 years ago, I continued, a civilization called the Orali encountered what we encountered today. The record of what's happened to them ends where the fleet arrived. I need you to understand that clearly. Their history does not end with a retreat or a treaty or a hard-fought defensive victory. It simply stops because they are gone. I paused. This is a pattern, a long one, a patient one. These fleets are sent. If the target is not capable of stopping them, the target is removed from the record. If you want to stay in the record, we cannot think about this as a defensive problem. We have to find where these things come from, and we have to end the pattern. Vreth spoke from his seat, not standing, not in the formal posture of arbitration. Just a voice from a tired-looking person sitting in a chair that was too large even for him. "How?" he said. "We trace the approach vector," I said. "We follow it back. We go to the source." The room began to talk. Many voices, many translation chips, a low, steady wave of sound that was not chaos but was not order either. Somewhere in the middle of it, a delegate from the Sorvi, the small aquatic species that had voted in my favour 11 months ago, sent a message to my tablet. It read, "We will send a ship." I looked at the message. Then I looked back out at the room. 47 species. Some of them frightened. Some of them still skeptical. Some of them grieving losses I would never fully understand. All of them now looking at a problem that was real and present and required more than a vote to dismiss. I thought about the data chip I had left on the podium 11 months ago, the countdown. I thought about the 11 months of building and planning and working in shifts because there was no other option. I thought about Clara Webb pulling the fleet through the lower corridor without hesitation. About Ned Hartley and his coloured tab notepad. About Owen Cole handing me coffee in a cold shuttle bay. About Daniel Shaw saying, "Once we're doing something, we can do it forever." The conversation in the room was loud now, heated in some corners, but it was a conversation which was different from a dismissal. I waited for a gap in the sound. Then I spoke again. "I am not asking for permission," I said clearly, into whatever quiet I could find. "I am asking for company. Humanity will go to the source. We will trace this back. You can come with us, or you can stay here and build better defensive lines and wait for the next wave, which will come, and the one after that, which will also come." I looked at Vreth. "Or you can accept that the problem is solvable and start solving it." Vreth looked back at me. Something moved behind his unblinking eyes. Not warmth exactly. Something more durable than warmth. Something that had survived a loss and was reorganizing around what came next. "What do you need?" he said. Everything changed after that. Not instantly. Not without argument and politics and the slow friction of 47 different decision-making cultures trying to move in the same direction. But the direction was established. The source was the target. The question was no longer whether to go, but how. Planning sessions became joint operations. 30 tactical databases merged with our sensor records. Survey deep space navigation expertise combined with 17 years of human trajectory modeling. A Valen species I had never directly interacted with contributed subspace mapping technology that extended our projection range by a factor of 12. Their representative, a compact, six-limbed being named Councillor Arith, came to my planning room in the second week and looked at my data walls for a long time before saying, through a translation chip, "You built all of this alone?" "Yes," I said, "for 17 years. Yes." Areth was quiet. "Then we should have listened." "I did not say you should have. I did not need to. We both knew it. We can move forward from here," I said instead, and that was enough. The fleet that assembled for the deep space mission was unlike anything I had commanded before. 42 human vessels, now repaired and restocked. 60 Therni ships under a new fleet command. 12 survey vessels whose navigation systems could read space at frequencies no one else could access. 4 Velen ships with the mapping technology. 8 vessels from smaller species who had been quietly preparing their own responses and now joined the coalition. 126 ships. I stood in the forward observation bay of the ESS Durban and looked at them through the viewport. Ned was beside me, reviewing the latest trajectory models. Owen was at the helm console running pre-departure checks. Clara Webb was commanding the Fremantle 3 positions off the Durban starboard. Ready? Owen said. Almost. I said. I opened my personal log. I had kept this log for 17 years. It had started as a professional record. Over time, it had become something else, something more personal, a conversation with the future version of the story I was living. I wrote a short entry. The log said, "The council finally asked the right question. We are going to answer it. Not to prove anything, not to collect a debt, because the galaxy has a pattern that ends civilizations, and patterns can be broken. And we have spent 17 years learning exactly how this one works. Also because it is the right thing to do, which has always been enough reason." I closed the log. "Now," I said, "let's go." The fleet moved out together. 126 ships, in a formation no tactical manual had ever described, because no one had ever assembled exactly this combination of vessels and cultures and capabilities before. The stars ahead were dark and the distance was very large, and the thing at the end of the route was something no living species in the galaxy had ever seen directly and survived to report. We went anyway. That is the human part of the story. Not that we were the strongest or the fastest or the oldest. We were none of those things. But when the problem was enormous and the dark was deep and the sensible response was to wait and hope, we went anyway. We always go anyway. 2 months into the deep space transit, Ned found the signal. It was not subtle once you knew how to look. And we knew how to look because we had been studying the approach vectors for 17 years, and the source signal was embedded in the same frequency band, just weaker with distance, like a light that is very far away but still burning. It came from a region of space that no species had surveyed, not unmapped in the way that vast portions of deep space are unmapped, meaning simply undocumented. Unmapped in a specific way, the vellum maps showed a deliberate gap, a region about 30 light years across where the surrounding survey data simply skipped, the way you skip a word in a sentence without noticing until you read it back. Councillor Areth confirmed this when I showed it to them. This region has been skipped in vellum maps for 800 years, they said. The reason given in our archives is navigational interference, an anomaly that disrupted standard mapping instruments. And no one went to investigate the anomaly, I said. No. The region was marked as hazardous and excluded from standard routes. I looked at the gap on the map. 30 light years. A hole in the record where something had been for at least 800 years, making itself hard to find. Not impossible to find, just inconvenient enough that no one had bothered. The destroyers came from there. I was certain. The trajectory projections, the signal frequency, the deliberate evasion of sensor shadow positions, all of it pointed to this gap in the vellum maps. Something in there was building and sending these fleets, had been doing it for thousands of years, with the patience of something that did not think in human timescales or Thurny timescales or any timescale that felt familiar. I briefed the full coalition command. The room was multi-species, which meant the briefing had to work across 5 different ways of understanding spatial data, 4 different concepts of what constitutes a threat, and 3 different political sensitivities about who gave orders. Gordon would have handled this more smoothly than I did, but Gordon was on Earth, coordinating production on the second wave of ships. I handled it my way, which meant directly. The source is in there, I said, pointing at the gap. I do not know exactly what we will find. It could be automated, it could be inhabited, it could be something we have no category for. What I know is that ending the pattern requires reaching it. A Thurnier commander named Admiral Gale, who had replaced Sene in the fleet hierarchy and who had the particular stillness of someone who had processed a great deal of grief and converted it into focus, asked a tactical question first. How do we approach without triggering a new fleet launch? We go quiet, I said. No standard drives. The Survey have a manoeuvring system that generates no electromagnetic output in the destroyer fleet's detection band. We use that. We go in slowly on passive sensors and we understand what we are looking at before we do anything. And when we understand it, Gale said, then we decide together. I said, Coalition Command. Unanimous threshold for any action with irreversible consequences. Gael nodded. This satisfied the Thurnier framework. RF, for the Velan, raised a secondary concern. If the source is inhabited, if there is something alive in there that is directing this, the question of communication must precede any other action. Agreed, I said. If it is alive and directing this, we attempt contact first, every time. That is not negotiable. No one disagreed with that, which told me something good about the species in the room. We went in on the Survey manoeuvring system, slow and dark, crossing the boundary of the mapped gap at week 9 of the transit. The Velan mapping technology, adjusted for the interference anomaly, began building a picture of the interior region. It took 3 days of careful scanning to get enough resolution to understand what we were looking at. What we were looking at was a construction site, not a planet, not a station, a structure in deep space, large enough that its gravitational influence had been the source of the navigation anomaly all along. It had the precise geometry of something deliberately built, not the irregular mass of a natural object. And it was old. The material composition, which the Velan instruments could estimate, suggested a construction age of approximately 12,000 years. It was also, as best our sensors could determine, entirely automated. No biological signatures, no communications traffic, just the slow, continuous operation of something enormous and very old, doing exactly what it had been designed to do, manufacturing and launching destroyer fleets on a rotation that had been running uninterrupted for millennia. There was no one to communicate with. There was no one to negotiate with. There was no one home. There had not been anyone home for a very long time. Whatever species had built this structure was gone. The structure they had built, their weapon, or their legacy, or their last desperate project, had outlasted them and kept operating because no one had told it to stop. I sat with this information for a long time before I shared it. Not to hide it, to let myself feel the full weight of it. Something had built a machine to do harm. And then that something had ceased to exist, and the machine had simply continued, ending civilizations not out of malice, but out of pure mechanical faithfulness to a purpose that had been set into it before history had time to change. Diorali. Whatever others might have existed in the gap between then and now, Civilizations that had simply run into this machine at the wrong moment. I opened the coalition channel. What we have found, I said, is a construction and launch facility approximately 12,000 years old. It is fully automated. There is no crew, no inhabitants. The species that built it no longer exists. The facility has been continuously operating on its original programming for its entire existence. The destroyer fleets are its output. Silence on the channel. Then Gale. It is a machine. Yes. We came to find an enemy and we found a machine. Yes, I said. Which changes what we do next. Ned had already been working on this. He pulled up the structural analysis on my console, pointing to a section deep in the facility's core, a power generation system that fed the entire construction process. If we interrupt the power generation, he said, the manufacturing process stops. The facility doesn't launch anything new. Any fleets already in transit would still complete their approach, but there would be no new launches. How do we interrupt the power generation without triggering a defensive response? I asked. We don't know if there is a defensive response, he said. The facility has never been approached before. We don't know what it does when it detects something close. Then we find out carefully, I said. We sent the smallest available probe, a Survey single-crew mapping vessel, to within 200 kilometers of the facility's outer perimeter. It took 4 hours. Nothing happened. No response. The facility continued its slow mechanical operations without acknowledging the presence of the probe. We moved a second probe closer. 100 kilometers. 50. Still nothing. Whatever defensive systems the facility might once have had, they either did not exist or had degraded over 12,000 years into uselessness. We had a path to the power core. The discussion of who went in lasted 6 hours. There were arguments for remote operation, for a precision strike from distance, for a combined team from multiple species. All of these were reasonable. All of them had specific technical limitations. The most direct route required a single small ship to navigate through the facility's outer structure, reach the power generation core, and deliver a disruption device that our engineering team had built during the transit. The navigation was complex. The approach window was narrow. The return route depended on the disruption not generating a cascade event, for which we had modelled a probability of 89%, which meant an 11% chance of a cascade. 11% is not comfortable. 11% is also not a reason not to act when the alternative is a machine that ends civilizations continuing to operate for another 12,000 years. I went. Clara Webb argued with me about this for 40 minutes before I reminded her that she was needed to command the fleet's extraction formation, and that if I did not come back, the fleet needed her more than it needed me. She did not like this. She was also not wrong, and she knew it, so she stopped arguing. Owen flew the Durban in. I managed the targeting and delivery of the disruption device from the navigation console. Ned monitored the power core readings from back on the fleet. The facility around us was massive and dark and 12,000 years old, and it did not react to us at all, which was either relief or the calm before something I had not modelled correctly. The disruption device delivered cleanly. The power core readings dropped, then dropped further. Then The manufacturing systems began to power down in sequence, one by one, the slow cessation of something that had been running without pause since before most of the species in the coalition fleet had existed. It took 40 minutes to power down completely. Then it was still. Owen flew us out through the same corridor we had entered. Nothing followed us. Nothing reached for us. The facility sat dark and quiet, and finally, after 12,000 years, finished. "Ned," I said. "Power output confirmed at 0, he said, and his voice was very steady for someone who had just spent 40 minutes watching a probability model that included an 11% chance of losing us. "No residual generation detected. The facility is offline." I looked out the viewport. The structure was still there, of course. Dark now. Enormous. Old beyond the reckoning of most things in this part of the galaxy. "We'll need to come back," I said. "Study it. Understand what was built here and why. Maybe understand what happened to the people who built it." "Not today," Owen said. "No," I agreed. "Not today." The coalition fleet reformed around the Durban as we exited the facility's perimeter. 126 ships, every crew from every species on every active channel. Gale's voice came through first, formal and clear, and carrying the weight of someone who had lost things and was still standing. "The facility is confirmed offline. Coalition Command acknowledges the mission complete." Then Arith. "Valen Fleet confirms." Then the survey. Then 5 smaller species in sequence. Then, one by one, the rest. I listened to all of them. Then I opened my personal log one more time. The entry I wrote was short. I wrote, "It was a machine. 12,000 years old. It didn't know it was hurting anyone. The people who built it are gone, and we may never know their story, but we turned it off. And that's what needed doing. Going home now." I closed the log. "Owen," I said. "Already plotting the course," he said. The stars came back as we turned toward home. The same stars that looked the same from everywhere. And I felt the particular piece of someone who has done the thing that needed doing and is now simply moving through the ordinary miracle of space towards something warm. In the formal session of the Galactic Council, 3 months after the fleet returned, the Orin provision was ratified by unanimous vote. It required that no species petition regarding a potential external threat could be dismissed without a full joint investigation by a minimum of 5 member species, with access to all relevant sensor data from all monitoring stations in the reporting species network. Vreth read the provision into the official record himself. When he was done, he looked at me across the chamber. I was sitting at the full member seat that humanity now occupied. Equal, permanent voting. He gave a small nod. I gave one back. That was the end of the formal part. Afterwards, in the corridor outside the main chamber, Ned was waiting with 2 cups of coffee that he had somehow managed to source from the council station's supply office, which was a considerable achievement. He handed me one. "How's the arm?" he said. "Fine," I said. "The arm had healed well. It had a slight ache in cold environments, which a medical technician had told me might persist. I had decided I did not mind. It was an honest ache." We walked together down the corridor toward the observation deck, where the viewport looked out on the docking array and the running lights of 1,000 ships from 47 civilizations. "What happens next?" Ned said. "Someone has to go back to the facility," I said. "Study it. Figure out who built it and why. What happened to them? There could be other installations we haven't found. The ones that built that facility may have left other things behind." Ned was quiet for a moment. "That's a long project," he said. "Yes," I said. Years, probably. Probably longer, I said. He looked out at the ships in the docking array. Are you going to lead it? I had been thinking about this. I had been thinking about it since the facility powered down and Owen set the course for home. There's a particular kind of problem that follows you out of one room and waits in the next one, not as a burden, but as something you recognize in the way you recognize your own voice. I'm going to recommend it to the council as the next joint priority, I said. And yes, probably I'll go. Ned nodded. He was quiet in the comfortable way, the way of someone who had no unnecessary things to add. We stood at the viewport and drank the coffee, which was not good coffee, which was never good coffee on any station I had ever been on. And I thought about 12,000 years of a machine doing harm, because no one had been close enough to turn it off. And I thought about all the things that are waiting in the dark for someone to get close enough, and I thought about the particular disposition of a species that, when it hears there is something waiting in the dark, checks its equipment, packs supplies, and starts walking. The stars outside the viewport were steady and very far away, and full of things we did not yet know. We were going to find out what they were. We always do.